Welcome. This is Mark Reed, and welcome to the channel. Welcome to the stream. I have with me today Richard Madsen, who's wonderfully agreed to talk with me about his worldview and my worldview, how they conflict, what our stances are, where we're coming from. And so I'd like to give a big thank you and a big welcome to Richard, who is here. Richard, why don't you just sort of give an introduction of what you do, what you're getting up to on the internet, and let everybody know where you're coming from.
Certainly. First of all, it's a privilege, and I begged for this conversation because I find Mark to be honest, and I find that to be unusual. Peace and respect to you all, anyone who might watch this in the future, anyone in side chat. Thank you so much for coming by Mark's channel. If you haven't liked and subscribed to Mark's channel, I don't know all of his content, but I'll say he's an interesting, intelligent, and at least from my point of view right now, an honest person. And I think that's worth some review. My stance is, you're quite welcome. Those are not compliments. Those are things I think are real.
Thank you.
You're welcome. At 12 years old, I defended myself against rape from a Catholic priest. The man is dead. I'm not hurting anyone by saying that. But I became immediately.
What's that? I'm so sorry to hear that, Richard.
I'm sorry to people who actually get raped.
You defended yourself, of course. Yes, yeah. It's still a traumatic thing for a young man to go through, or anybody to go through, really, but especially a young person, 12 years old. That is horrible.
The difficult was the man was also my mother's employer. So I had to find a way to not get her fired and let him down easy while not 12. Anyway.
Yeah. I can only imagine. Yeah, absolutely. That's horrible.
So I declared myself, if Mom, who was my authority in life, said that the Catholic Church was right, and I found out the Catholic Church was wrong, especially in moral issues, then I had no church. I became an atheist. I maintained my atheism until I was 42 years of age, at which time I was shown a reading frame, which is, I have to tell you, more than fringe. For reading these ancient stories, which include the Bible, these ancient religious stories. And I now am very persuaded. I'm personally fully persuaded, which doesn't make a thing true, but I'm fully persuaded that Christians are not talking about the intention of the authorship of such as the Bible. They are talking about their church traditions and the reading frame that they have from doctrines, which is why I call the YouTube channel Demolish Doctrine, because I believe the stories are talking about the end of superstitions, the end of magical thinking, and valuing reality. That is to say, I could say something like, I believe the biblical father would be qualified as an atheist, would not be a religious person in the typical sense.
Right. So by the religious father, who specifically are you referring to? Like the God figure, or the father as in the father of the Trinity kind of thing? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, which Christians will conflate with God.
Right. And so when you say a reading frame, actually, I'll just talk a bit about where I came from as well, actually, just quickly before we go into. So I was raised in a very secular household here in Australia, and I grew up in a household that was kind of, they kind of got into some light astrology and light sort of beliefs that were now I know to be incorrect. But I didn't grow up with a God concept at all. It wasn't something that was given to me until much later in life, where sort of people acclaimed this thing. But I did believe in astrology for a long time. I did believe in certain things for a very long time, until I was introduced to sort of critical thinking, going through university and on the internet. And I realized that these views about astrology and what was the other one? The oils kind of thing, essential oils and things like that. They
homeopathy.
homeopathy, yeah, and aromatherapy kind of thing. They weren't actually justified. I think they were more just imparted to me by my mother, who sort of believed a whole bunch of things. One of the things that really destroyed my belief in these, I call it light woo, sort of new agey kind of stuff. One of the things that destroyed it was that my mother was feeling tired and she was fatigued all the time. Went around. Well, she tried everything kind of thing. That's all right. She died a while ago, but she tried everything, tried Chinese medicine. I remember her having drinks with scorpions, like sort of crushed up, like actual scorpions crushed up and put in it. So all of the aromatherapy, all of these oils, all of these sort of solutions. She sort of believed all of this stuff, but she was persuaded by a very, very smart friend to go see a doctor. And it was celiac disease. It was a gluten allergy. And as soon as she changed her diet, bang, she was perfect kind of thing. And it just showed me that, we can believe in all this stuff, but there is a grain of truth that we can sort of seek out kind of, and that sort of demolished, because she went through all of this kind of, new age stuff, and believed in it and believed it was helping her at points along the way, but it wasn't. And sort of that sort of broke me out of this spell. But that's how I got here kind of thing to YouTube. But that's where I'm coming from. But you sort of said your reading frame. So how would you, I presume you're saying that the Bible, you're looking at it in a completely different frame than anybody else. Is that what you're sort of saying?
Of course, I can't survey everybody. So I don't mean that. I don't mean that precisely,
Yes.
but anyone that I know of. So different from anyone I know of. Yes, that if I were to put it in an elevator speech, that it would be probably easiest to say something like ancient human astronauts purposefully terraform planets, leaving us to our own devices, their children, us, to their own devices, so that we make ourselves suffer, so that we can have a comparative between what is perfection and what is not perfection, having made a series of mistakes, that being the history of this planet. To teach us a comparative, so that when we live in a utopian society, we can maintain it, and that being a much longer time. So it is ends justifies the means, but generally the stories are not talking about magic. That you've probably heard the quote: "Sufficiently advanced technology would be mistaken for magic." And I think that's exactly what has happened. Miracles. That's exactly what has happened. That it's speaking of technology and it's perceived by the religious as magic, but it's not describing magic.
Right. See, this is an idea that I used to believe when I was younger. I had got really invested in a book called Chariots of the Gods. Eric von Daniken, I believe, sort of was the first person in the 70s to propose this idea. I find it interesting they said ancient human astronauts, that they're the same species as us. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. In fact, although Christians ignore the parts of the text for their church doctrines, they prefer what the church fathers have said over actually reading, which is just evidently true. The Bible in the book of Revelation of Jesus Christ, chapter 7, verses 9 through 15, identifies an uncountable group, which we've counted this group. We know exactly how many we are and how many have lived here to some kind of fairly close number. An uncountable number who live present tense with God, serving him past tense day and night. This is what they do. And then it says that he calls them angels. Then it says how they got to that situation. And the description of how they got to the situation is that they went through the great day of the Lord, or end times, and they washed their clothes in the blood of the Lamb, or accepted Christ. So they go through end times accepting Christ. That's where angels come from, according to the text.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I'm just looking up Revelation 7 so I can sort of get an idea of what you're saying. I think that a lot of stuff in the Bible could be interpreted many different ways, and people do interpret it many different ways.
Of course.
But I do want to get a handle on what your interpretation of it, because this is talking about tribes and things like that. A great
7, 9 through 14.
Well, the earlier passages I am trying to read in context, sort of. So, of the tribe of Judea was sealed 12,000, tribe of Reuben was sealed 12,000, tribe of Gad was sealed.
The subject change happens at 8.
Yeah, okay. So, for tribe of Benjamin, yeah. And I beheld this lower great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds of people and tongues, stood before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed with white clothes and palms unto their hands. Cried with a loud voice, saying, "Salvation to our God, with citizen throne." Yeah, so this is talking about the worship of God by this unnumbered amount. And therefore they would be before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, that he sitteth on the throne, dwell among them. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think that is a literal thing. This is Revelations, right? And of course, so I don't believe in the Bible, so I don't really give a lot of credence to it. But when you say humans, so what we're talking about is the gods were astronauts, basically, and angels were astronauts. It's not to be honest with you, it's not a bigger stretch as a supernatural being for me, because at least you've got a naturalistic explanation.
It's a smaller stretch, yeah.
It's a smaller stretch, I guess is what I would say. However, having said that, how would you explain the DNA similarities between sort of chimpanzees and humans, for instance, if they are
very interesting.
Humans?
That's very interesting. I think we're directly related. I think what the science obviously shows, never mind our human assumptions about it, but what the science, I think, objectively shows is there's relationship.
Right. So how would you explain the sort of, if they're humans as well, why would humans be related to earthbound apes? Why would aliens that have come to our planet be related to earthbound apes?
It actually is also a resolution to the abiogenesis and the ancient atmosphere problem. That there is a possible atmosphere and situation where abiogenesis can occur sufficiently enough in enough different varieties that we could end up with what we have here. That's not really a problem. It's only a problem, from what I understand, of the ancient atmosphere of this earth. But what the text is claiming is that this evolutionary process, some kind of naturalistic, something like a Darwinistic or neosynthetic evolutionary process did happen. It just didn't happen on this planet. And it happened a lot longer ago than we really understand. And what we're surveying here is what's been translated purposefully terraforming this planet. But all of these things are only samples of what happened somewhere else. So in that naturalistic process and the development of slaves and the perfection of slaves, the dominant species, which interestingly enough was some kind of a herd animal species, some kind of what do we call them? We could say the cattle, the bovine. That I don't know what the clade is called, but hooved animals were actually the first dominant species on that planet. They started manipulating genetics of apes because apes have, the opposable thumb and are very, very handy and make good workers, but apparently made an error in their manipulation of the apes and made one that was just way too smart to be a slave. Right. And it rebelled.
Okay. Well, I mean, Bovinidae is the cattle, yes. So Bovinidae. Bovinidae is the
bovine. Bovinidae. Okay.
Yeah, Bovinidae. So we're sort of in Hominidae, right, which is hominids. And that includes all of the great apes, because we're so obviously related. But it's the whole. I guess the whole point is that not all of hominidae are humans. Like chimpanzees are pan troglodytes. They're not humans. So if a alien progenitor came down and manipulated ape's DNA, the alien progenitor wouldn't be human because we evolved from an ape ancestor, sort of the New World monkeys kind of thing. That's where we evolved from. Yes. So we're kind of intrinsically linked to the rest of this biosphere, but you're sort of calling these ancient aliens humans, where I don't see why they would be human unless they are somehow responsible. We are passed from them, that we are part of their DNA chain, or they're descended from us. Because when we're talking about clades and what it means to be human, it means that you have descended from a certain lineage. Yes. Right? So in this case, we're talking about chimpanzees and humans branched off the same genetic tree kind of thing. So in sort of saying those aliens were human, you would have to say they branched off the same genetic tree, which I'm struggling to understand how that would happen. And I do want to talk about abiogenesis because it is a fascinating topic to me.
Okay, but I don't know much about it, but
yeah, I mean, I don't really mind. Yeah, I've got no problem with what you're saying. It's just the sticking point for me is that they were human. I don't understand how a creature that genetically removed from the human clade, the human lineage, the hominidae of Earth, would be part of our species when they wouldn't be part of our family or genus.
Okay. That confused me, which makes me think I said something poorly.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that sort of so I guess it may depend on what about our ideas of what constitutes being human is. So can you tell me sort of genetically, if you know, where these sort of alien humans, like where their lineages derived from, where they descended from, if they descended from anywhere at all?
Okay. Maybe I got it. We'll find out here in a minute when you tell me that made no sense or not, or if it did make sense. Okay. On some Earth-like planet in a galaxy far, far away, long ago, something like that, was an Earth-like planet where an abiogenesis-like process occurred, making all of the kinds of animals that we see, all the different species and clades and all that. Okay. Yeah. Monkeys developed different, but somewhat alongside of bovine. Bovine were the dominant species. They started messing around with apes and may be responsible for like the number 2 fusion. And maybe that's the difference right there. That caused this new slave class, which the old slave class we would think of as like, the gorillas, perhaps some old world monkeys were used as slaves, but definitely all of what we would call proto man, what we would think of as, like they say caveman.
So the ancient,
but all of those series,
so the Paleolithic hominoids, like
all the hominoids, right?
Cro-Magnon, sure.
We're in the story, the Jew slaves, and it's at a point of rebellion that starts with a singular individual who's significantly different from the slave class, but comes from the slave class. In fact, so significantly different, he's put in charge of probably 2/3 of governance of all of the land, which is a lot of responsibility on one person. So certainly he was well thought of. But unfortunately, coming from the slave class and seeing that he was not of the pharaoh, the master class, he had moral issues,
Right.
and rebelled and caused a rebellion single-handedly, a rebellion that apparently couldn't be stopped. So, where incidentally they borrow from their neighbors with no intention of returning, that's called theft, literally. Then they steal technology that they didn't make, and they exit. They have an exodus. After that, when the chasing is over with, they go and start. Well, it starts the beginning right after that. The story of Genesis, which is essentially terraforming planets, and they've put, the claim is, in an internal critique, the claim is that they put all this stuff here on purpose, but they took it from somewhere else. The Christian ex nihilo claim simply isn't there. It says reform and repurpose. You can't have something that is formless and void that doesn't also exist. Like, it's like saying my lack of car has a flat tire and is out of gas. That doesn't make any sense in reality, but that's the way Christians read it, where the text is claiming the planet existed and they changed it.
Okay, so the humans that did this, who interfered on this planet, were already genetically changed by I presume there's another species of alien, the bovine aliens that you're talking about.
Yes, the Elohim.
Right. So they manipulated monkeys on their planet. Right. Then those humans did the manipulation on our planet, or just moved to our planet?
There is a manipulation within the story. It says that despite the fact that flesh is meant to live forever, we will be locked down to less than 130 years, the estimate 120 years. So there is that genetic manipulation by those claiming to be ancestors. Right.
So and the technical term for what you've sort of described instead of abiogenesis is panspermia. Panspermia is just any obtaining of genetic material from outside the planet, external to the planet. Yeah, so it can be bacteria or meteoroids or whatever.
Yeah, I'm actually claiming an intervention, an intelligent interference.
Right, and that's one version of it. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you've got so here I see sort of as two different alien species. So you've got sort of the aliens that are the Bovinidae sort of style of aliens who genetically manipulate a slave class from their sort of monkeys and create the hominidae sort of type, and then those flee their planet or their subservience to these Elohim, as you called them, the bovine type, and then sort of seeded themselves upon this world, but they didn't stay on this world. Have I got that correct? So I don't want to misinterpret.
Yes, that's, and I don't know that even answers what I probably said poorly in the first place. You'd have to tell me.
No, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But I mean, I don't have a problem with that as long as the human aliens use their own DNA, because they would have to in order to, because most of these ancient astronaut stories that I have heard is that a completely different species came to Earth and created humans on this Earth, but didn't exist apart from this Earth. That's what I've usually heard.
I've heard that. I don't think that holds any water in the stories.
Right. So by stories, you mean the Bible specifically?
No, but the Bible's included.
Yeah, sure. And so when you said that sort of Exodus kind of thing, are you talking about the Bible as describing their Exodus, or are you saying that the Exodus is sort of a parallel for what happened in the Bible kind of thing? I guess I'm asking whether you think the Exodus happened on Earth or it happened on another planet.
It's a recurring theme that happens in a certain situation at a certain time in the development of a people. For instance, The Exodus is the learning process of you going to college. The Exodus is the escape plan of the original Moses story and his leading animals, which he's related to but aren't near his intelligence, in a rebellion. And the Exodus is also the story of us leaving the planet and that learning process. So it's kind of all of the above.
So are you sort of saying that the leaders in the Bible were sort of these aliens come to Earth kind of thing? They were, because you mentioned Moses was one, yes. Right? I guess, I mean, I've got a number of problems with this. The lack of evidence for Moses is certainly troubling, but my major problem is how long ago are you purporting this happened?
Which occurrence of this?
The seeding. Like I do apologize. Yeah, the seeding of our Earth. How long ago do you purport this happened?
It's probably about as science thinks it is.
As science thinks it is.
Yeah, like the planet is something in the early billions range. The atmosphere is something also in the early billions range. Water started collecting on the, pretty much just what they think.
Okay. Well, the thing is that humans have only been around for, sort of a few million years. Like we haven't been around for that long at all.
Right.
Which is sort of, I guess that, to my mind, it's a lot better explanation to me that we formed slowly over millions of years and went through a number of iterative stages with sort of very primitive cells going up to very simple multicellular creatures to more and more complex forms. We had the age of the dinosaurs during the Jurassic and Triassic and things like that. And sort of the hominidae clade is only a very, very new split off from the mammalia sort of section. It's not a very long line at all in the great scheme of things. So I guess my problem is, why have, if aliens were just coming here to make humans, and propagate their own species, why would they make all of that billions of years history of dinosaurs and single cells and very, very, simple stuff in order just to have humans around for a tiny fraction of the Earth's history?
Yeah. Of course, you know that I'm agreeing with you on everything you just said. We're only bickering on location.
You're agreeing with everything I said, but bickering on location. What do you mean by that?
That the beginning of the abiogenesis process just didn't happen here. And although a very naturalistic evolutionary process did happen, it just didn't happen here. And what we have is samplings of that process here.
Yeah, but why would they transplant sort of all of the fossils and all of the?
What do you mean transplant? The dinosaurs lived here.
Okay. I think we might be sort of, talking past one another, maybe.
I'm saying something poorly, I can tell.
No. It may be me. It might be my understanding, Richard. It's not automatically you, mate. But so you've got so ancient humans sort of brought their own DNA down to Earth because all of this stuff existed somewhere else.
Yes, they just stole.
Right? They just stole from the Elohim, as you called them, the bovine.
Right. For instance, the text says that there was animals and every plant before it was in the earth, and there was no man to till the soil. 3:2. It's saying it had all these supplies already. It doesn't say anything about inventing the supplies. It never does. That's a Christian assumption. But future expansion in Moses, they explain where the stuff came from and how they got it.
Right, but you do realize that as you go back through stratigraphy, I always say that word wrong. Beamsy's going to kill me. He's a geologist. I know he's going to kill me. Stratigraphy, like we look back stratas, we find that none of the modern animals are present in those older stratas.
Yes,
That they get simpler and simpler back until you get sort of, the simple animals.
that's what I would expect.
Right, but if they just transplanted the animals from another location to Earth, why is it that we see this development of simple organisms into more complex organisms?
You've somehow taken this as a one-off event.
Okay, well, correct me if I certainly may have.
That's what I never said is over time.
Over time,
terraforming. We know that there wasn't instant air and then instant water immediately after the air. We know that. We know that simple life forms, blue-green algae, etc., whatever, all that's really, really simple life forms were here way before there was ever anything with hair.
Right.
We're quite sure of that. Yeah, and I have no argument against it. I think the text demands that.
Okay, so what exactly, if we have a sort of simple cells and getting more complex, and we have this process going on the Earth of things adding complexity, basically getting into more complex life forms, then what exactly would the aliens have to have done? The human aliens, of course, have to have done to generate humans, because it seems like, to me at least, that process would produce intelligent life by itself. So
quite possibly,
yeah, I'm not sure I understand what they would have done because you've sort of said that, well, they've brought over their own DNA and sort of put them in the sort of in the genetic sequence kind of thing, right?
No, not exactly. It's not a Zachariah Sitchin idea at all, which that's very Sitchin-y. But no, but what I'm saying is that they occurred on that planet of the malevolent Elohim. They left it because they have an opinion that something can be malevolent, and they like have morality and stuff. They escaped. They started terraforming their own planets, doing their own thing. They had the technology and power to do that from the beginning, which they stole. And over a course, a series described in Genesis, the 6 days of creation, is a very long process of large time frames, which we do see in stratigraphy. That the further you dig down, the simpler the thing. And of course, land masses resettle. There's uplift. There's also, down. What's that word? Doesn't matter. There's also crustal. Yes, thank you. And because of that, it forms these layers. And the further you dig down, the simpler the thing. And that makes total sense. There is nothing in the 6 days of creation that say that these should be very short time frames. In fact, I think they're extremely long time frames.
Yeah. No, I understand that. It can be taken as sort of a day can be X amount of years. That doesn't matter to me. It's, sure, you can interpret it that way. That's no problem to me.
I think I missed your question, though.
No, that's okay. Do you have a name for these? So just for the sake of brevity and accuracy, do you have a name for these humans that were seeding planets? Because you have the Elohim, the ones that were subjugating them. Do you have a name for the humans that were?
There's lots of names. The biblical name would be angel.
So they were angels. Okay.
Well, that's how we refer to them from that religion.
It's more just something to refer to them in our internal conversation, so we both kind of know what we're talking about here. So I guess my question is, so if they're coming back and sort of tinkering with things again and again and again, we sort of have, and my problem with it is we have these markers in our DNA where, have you ever heard of ERVs?
Yeah, I know basically, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, so a retrovirus
endogenous
is like
retroviruses.
right, exactly. But a retrovirus is a virus that goes back and inserts its own DNA in your genetic sequence. So AIDS does that. It basically inserts a copy of its own DNA. It integrates that into your DNA, kind of thing.
Right.
If that happens in the germline in an egg or a sperm, it basically is passed to every cell in your body, and the endogenization happens when that is passed down the lineage, kind of thing. And that might be turned off because of mutations. It might be changed because of mutations, but we do know it happens. And I guess my problem is with that is if they came down and sort of just sort of put their DNA on the planet, we wouldn't share all of these endogenous retroviruses with stuff even here. So did they use what was here already to sort of manipulate with their own DNA, or did they just transfer their own DNA, sort of humans that came from their own planet, onto our planet?
I think the ERVs happened on Satan's homeworld. That they didn't alter anything. That we are just seeing samples of what happened somewhere else. And of course, all those things being here, we see the relationship plainly.
Yeah, I guess though. I'm trying to understand what exactly the angels did. These humans did to create humankind.
They didn't.
Well, they must have gotten their genetic sequence onto the planet somehow, either through, or are we just sort of the same DNA as the angels, just relocated onto this planet?
Yes, except for that we have a very limited lifespan.
Right. Okay. So that's the change kind of thing. So when you say so they're related to chimpanzees on their planet, and they just transferred the chimpanzees onto this planet,
which means they're related to the chimpanzees that are here as well.
Okay. All right. Now, Satan's homeworld, what is that? Where is that? I guess I would ask. Sure.
I don't know. It's more distant than the human eye can see.
Mm-hmm.
And how long ago this happened would probably be a very long time frame that would be hard for me to grasp in real terms. I mean, theoretically, we could talk about those kinds of time frames.
Mm-hmm. And so how did, so you said that ERVs were probably done on Satan's homeworld. What exactly do you like? Are you talking about they seeded the homeworld first, or are you saying that
no, that a naturalistic process happened there?
And so how did that get onto our homeworld?
They stole things and brought it here.
Okay, so retroviruses, for instance.
They stole everything that we see here and just brought it here and dropped some off.
Okay.
They didn't have to alter any of that. I mean, all the naturalistic process is just repeated here.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. So is Satan's homeworld the same as the Elohim planet, or is that a different planet that we're talking about?
It's really interesting. Yahweh doesn't exist till after Adam. Before that, it's Elohim in the story. And then if you look into the meaning of what Elohim is, it's a plural of a Hebrew word Eloach, which is a singular powerful being. And then Elohim means a group of powerful beings. And then if you look further into the etymology of the word, it doesn't identify if they're good or bad, good or evil, benevolent or malevolent. They could be either one. And from what I can tell from the story, the keepers of the slaves are not nice.
Right. So this Elohim are not a benevolent sort of God that
Right.
they're thinking of. They're an evil dictator that kept slaves and enslaved, well, humanity, not only on, well, I guess they didn't enslave us. So, but they did enslave the angels that you were talking.
All of our ancestors,
Right.
all of our naturalistic.
Right. So is Satan a Elohim? Just a particularly nasty one kind of thing? Okay.
Well, it depends on what you mean by what is evil, because I mean, breathing water for me is evil. Breathing water for a fish is good. So I think evil
I would agree.
I think evil is species specific.
Right.
You know? Okay, so the Elohim, Satan and his kind, the first to develop, as far as I can understand, in a very naturalistic process, to become the most advanced technologically, that they, by golly, I think I've lost your original statement because I got sidetracked. I'm sorry. Would you repeat?
No, I was just asking whether Satan was an Elohim, but a particular.
Yes, you find that the etymology of the word doesn't identify whether they're good or evil. But then in the story of Moses and Herod and the birthing cycle, where they kill off all but one escapes because mom does something actually rather unintelligent, but that one is allowed to live by happenstance, and then is put in charge of much of governance, which is, of course, recognition of intelligence. You wouldn't do that with a slave.
Yeah. So I guess my problem is that there's certain things in our biology, certain traits that we have, that we 100% need ERVs for.
Need what? ERVs for? Okay.
Yeah. They've sort of been co-opted by mutation, and we use them to resist some forms of the retroviruses. We also need them in order to do things like produce a offspring in the womb. It's actually a great benefit to us, and we can't live without them, or we can't be human without them. Right. So it's very confusing to me, and I'm not sort of blaming you for this, Richard, but it's very confusing to me to say, well, they got them, these angels got them from the home world. And what rises up for me is, well, how did the angels, because we need them to procreate, so how did the angels procreate if they got them from a home world later? It really confuses me.
Apparently. What I actually said was that the ERVs happened long ago on some other Earth.
Yes.
That it got introduced and became part of this process a very long time ago.
Okay.
And there are those same things here.
I must have misunderstood, because you said so do we dwell on Satan's homeworld? Because that's where you said
for a very short time, the first humans, Adam and Eve, before the rebellion, did physically live there. So did all of the hominids, so did all of the apes, so did all of the mammals, so did all of the going right on down the list.
Okay. Well, I think I've got sort of an overview of what you've said has happened, and I think I really ought to get on the best part of so I understand what that you're saying. I understand that the Bible is a reflection of all these events that happened before our planet was even colonized, kind of thing. It was a misunderstanding. So, Richard, I want to get on to how you know all of this, so you're sort of claiming that all of these events happened in the past. I want to know how you know that all of this happened, because I guess there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence pointing towards it. Well, for me anyway. All of these processes that you've described appear to have happened on Earth. They appear to, and I'm not saying that evidence couldn't be faked or whatever. I'm sort of asking for your rationale. What compels you to believe that you know this is the case?
Well, I'd like to take a little sidebar before that, actually.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no problem at all.
That it wouldn't involve faking anything.
Okay.
There's no necessity of dishonesty. That there is. I mean, the theories we use right now to explain what we see in nature are completely viable theories. They're fine. But it wouldn't be deceptive if you just created a biodome and put, a stable series in it. It would look like this. You wouldn't have to like plant dinosaur bones. You could, like, the dinosaurs could actually live there and stuff and have their time. Especially if you're not in a hurry trying to do something in a very, very short amount of time, say 200,000 or 6,000 years. If you're not restricted like that.
Yeah, I guess the whole point I'm trying to get across is why would you? So at one point that before plants existed, the atmosphere was just sort of didn't have oxygen kind of thing. There's been times where sort of the atmosphere has changed. Like there used to be a lot more oxygen in the atmosphere, and then sort of during the age of the dinosaurs, which is why insects grow so big.
So
and now
large.
there's not, right. There's been a number of changes that appears to have nothing to do with humans whatsoever, and in fact aren't conducive to human life. So if you wouldn't see that in a biodome, because if you were setting up a biodome to receive a species, right, you wouldn't bother going through all of these iterations of environment in order. You would just set up the biodome for that species. That's what doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I don't know. I'm not trying to push an argument from ignorance on you. But
no, that's fine.
But I don't think that there's a magic photon missile like in Star Trek that just instantly terraforms planets and brings Spock back to life. What I'm saying is that it's a long, arduous process that takes a very long time and has to be done in a specific order in order to accomplish what we see today. Right.
It just seems odd to me to go through these iterations of plants that sort of aren't really conducive to an environment that humans would like, in order to get to plants that sort of fit well with what we're doing. It just doesn't seem like a very credible way to set up an environment. It seems like you're better off just skipping straight to the part where you're setting up the environment. And don't get me wrong, I completely grant that it would take ages. It's just that if you have that environment somewhere else, I guess I'm saying, why not just transplant the organisms of that environment?
Well, that might be fine for some things, but I don't think it'd be fine for all things. For instance, like coal beds, oil, I don't know, uranium. Sure. I mean, for some things that might be just fine. I'm not certain what it takes to terraform a planet.
Well, neither am I, in fairness.
But I'm also not going to beg the question by saying, well, we ended up with this, which is what we need.
Okay.
So it's kind of hard to say, and really, from like a philosophical sense, you couldn't be an atheist or agnostic under this paradigm if it were done the way you're suggesting it should have been done. You would not have a choice about it. If we found something that said, oh, this actually happened in 6,000 years or whatever, and it was compressed down to that kind of a time frame, just an end result kind of thing, certainly our science would have discovered that there's holes, there's problems, and would have informed the rest of the population. And then we'd have no free will about it. We'd say, well, this naturalistic process would have taken, almost, 2.3 billion years. And we see a process that we see evidence that this whole process is only 6,000 years old. You would not have a choice. You'd have to say that this was done by intelligent interference.
Well, free will doesn't. So the whole idea of free will, it isn't saying that you have to follow a god or gods, things like that. Okay. There's nothing about free will that says, well, if there's overwhelming evidence for it, you have to believe it, and therefore free will. But you're getting into sort of, do we believe things consciously, or are they, inevitable? You're talking about doastic at that point. But there's nothing about free will that says, hey, if you've got overwhelming evidence, you must believe it, that violates free will. There's nothing about that at all.
No. It's not the free will itself that would become the problem.
Right. It would just be a case of, well, if we've got overwhelming evidence for something, you'd still have the free will to deny it. Many people do deny things with overwhelming evidence. But
yes.
So we're actually talking flat Earth before, how it's there's overwhelming evidence. People still have the free will to choose to not believe it, and that's fine. I guess my problem is there's you've made a lot of claims and there's not a lot of evidence to back it up. All of this can be explained by initial conditions on the Earth and the processes that you've sort of subscribed. Sure. And I think that one of the things that sort of hasn't been answered for me is sort of what the angels did on Earth that would have changed the way that, if this happened naturally on their planet, that intelligent life forms evolved on their planet. As you said, it's quite likely to have evolved on our planet as well, given enough time. If that's the case, what reason do we have for thinking there was any interference at all?
What I think they did, and why they did it the way that they did it, was actually to shorten the amount of time it takes.
Mm-hmm.
Love you. Have peace.
But we don't
shorten the amount of time.
How long it takes, but we don't know. Like you said, we've never, we don't know how that works. We don't know how long it took on another planet, do we? We have no idea.
No, I think that the chances of this happening, all of this that we see from abiogenesis all the way to, I don't know, what's the most recent critter? Who does know that? That it takes maybe even a little longer as a percentage than we right now have estimated.
Well, I don't know. I've heard a lot of creationists say that abiogenesis is incredibly unlikely, would never happen, kind of thing. I don't subscribe to that. There are varying hypotheses around abiogenesis, and I do grant that it's not a certainty. I do grant that, and there's a lot unknown about it. But I'm not convinced it's sort of the odds are so unlikely that it couldn't happen. I think there's a number of hypotheses like thermal vents and things like that say, yeah, it possibly could happen. I mean, there's even, you're talking about panspermia from intelligent origins. However, there is panspermia from non-intelligent origins as well, which sort of says, hey, just bacteria carried on an asteroid could populate another planet. There's no problem with that. I don't believe that. So the reason why I don't believe that is because there's no actual evidence for it. Now, if someone asks me, how did life start on the planet? My first thing is, I don't know. Abiogenesis is not a theory. It's not a solid thing that we've got a mountain of evidence for, like evolution, for instance. Evolution, there's a ton of evidence for it. Abiogenesis is not the same. I think I would sort of follow that up by saying, I think the most likely scenario is abiogenesis. That's what I would lean towards, but I don't claim to know that. Right. The problem for me is you're sort of making these claims that you know this to be true, right?
I from the beginning of this talk, I said that these are things I'm persuaded of.
Okay.
which does not make them true.
Okay,
And
gotcha.
I'm talking about a reading frame for the stories.
Yeah.
This is not by some kind of necessity, even though I'm fully persuaded, the only way or the correct way to read these stories.
Oh, well, I apologize then.
So
I
I'm
don't
not
want to.
making a knowledge claim at all.
Oh, that's fine. That's not a problem. I do apologize. I'm
If
sort
you
of.
want to talk, if you mean why am I persuaded, I would describe it.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to hear it. Absolutely.
Okay, if that's what you meant.
Yeah.
I'm persuaded because of extreme repetition of these stories in an umbrella, a kind of an overview that crosses cultures and times, and different amount of times that people have had written word, spoken word, no kind of as best as we can estimate, no language whatsoever, no commonality of language, no way to communicate. These stories go back that far in some places. For instance, the Aboriginal Australian is the land bridge apparently got covered up by rising seas about 18,000 years ago. And recent estimates of the age of the languages themselves is something 7 to 11,000 years, which means they crossed the land bridge not speaking, is what that means. So there's no way I guess there's ways to carry stories, but at some level of specificity, it wouldn't be reasonable to think that you could carry the instructions for an internal combustion engine with no language, just by using like physical body movements and signs and stuff. Like, I think that's at some point of complexity, it's not reasonable to think that's possible. And that's one of the things I find very persuasive.
Although art is a lot older than that, like a lot older than that, like the Aboriginal art. And I'm not sure the land bridge was 18,000 years ago. I think it was
it's an estimate I read. I don't know these things.
Okay. No worries. I mean, I can certainly look it up if we want to find out what, sort of science says. But I think it was a lot old. And the Aboriginal culture is incredibly old, like at least 40,000 to 80,000 years, I believe. So
yeah, but that doesn't help the language barrier problem and the complexity. I mean, you can do a lot with art. I'm persuaded you could, but at some level of complexity, the kind of things we see expressed in ancient arts is not complex enough to convey those ideas.
I think language is older than that. Let me have a look. Yeah, so language evolved about 50,000 to 150,000 years ago. So that would be, I think sort of the cradle of civilization is probably about 150,000 years ago. And I think that sort of that's in line with humans evolving and our sort of vocal cords branching off from the other apes, because they're very, very different. We've got a much wider range of movement for our jaws, things like that.
You're talking about a human's ability in evolution to speak.
Yes.
I'm not.
Okay. What are you talking about then?
The estimates that I've read on the age of the Aboriginal language is something between 7 and 11,000 years. It doesn't matter if they had the ability of vocalizations for 100,000 years before that. That's irrelevant.
Right.
That there just wasn't these languages, that they've estimated these languages at a certain age.
But the whole point you're making is that language couldn't convey a combustion engine, but what the concepts that we're talking about and the stories that we're talking about isn't as complex as that. And they all vastly differ from one another. They have common elements, but they vastly differ. So that's kind of what you would expect with very primitive languages. That's sort of what I would expect, is for the concepts to be carried over, but not the actual details.
I think you're speaking in social prejudice. That that we are very used to thinking of a certain thing because where and when we and how we were raised and by whom, and we adopt that mindset that we learned from our youth, and I think it's very, very difficult to be open-minded enough to say, I eat the cow and that's right, and a Hindi person will not eat the cow because that is a representation or a direct relative of theirs who has passed, and they're right. Because if I made up this story, but I think it works well for this explaining this. If you took super glue and glued my bare feet to the street and a city bus were coming at me, and something caused a stampede of cattle, and those cattle came and ripping the bottom of my feet off, but hey, I get to live. I don't get hit by a bus. And one of those cattle are hit by the bus. To me, that's a very different story than it is to a Hindi.
Right.
To them, that's a whole nother level where I'll be wondering what exploded, who shot off a shotgun, what cattle rustlers, wrecked their van,
Sure.
and their cattle truck. That's the sort of thing an American would be thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, that's sort of cultural perspective. I do acknowledge that, but I guess it's more getting at that it's a game of telephone anyway. So when you have people sort of saying something in a primitive language, and then the language changes and things are copied down and translated, and
Mm-hmm.
these stories, they're never the same. Even people passing it on from one to another, and that's the whole point
Right.
of the game telephone in a circle. It's not the same by the time it comes out the other side.
Sure.
Which means that it's very hard to know what the original story was.
Right.
So what you do end up with the game of telephone is common elements, sort of maybe one word here or there the same, but a completely different communication. And this is the problem, that I can't say for sure what happened in these stories that made them write them down in this way. And they may not have the correct story either. And this is the thing that I always think with especially documents like the Bible, is that the original documents that we have aren't the originals that were written down. And
Right.
they certainly weren't the origin for the stories. That was probably most likely, that we can tell, oral
Much
tradition
older.
passed it on. Yeah, right. Just people
Sure.
telling each other stories. So
Sure.
the problem becomes, how do we evaluate what happened here when we know these stories change so much over time? And so, Richard, I'm not having a go at you. I really am not. It's just that when somebody says, okay, well, I believe this happened, I feel like, well, how do you know that was the original story? Because what you're sort of saying is, hey, that the story's changed and now Christians believe, right, these were gods and angels and Satan, and and you're sort of saying, well, no, I believe that the story changed, and it was originally these Elohim with humans as slaves that seeded other planets. And to me, the justification to say that's the version of events isn't there. So is it just your reading of the Bible? Is there anything else that you would sort of say is evidence that your version is correct?
Yes, complexity. If there's sufficient complexity within the stories, and not just commonalities of high points, which would indicate something like human nature, I would agree with you. And by the way, telephone game translations, transliterations, changes of languages should destroy the story, should make it very different. All of those things would make me expect to find almost no overlap, or seriously no overlap. But that's not what I find. What I find is extreme complexity from within social structures that tell precisely the same stories. And that wouldn't be a result of something like transliteration, translation.
What do you mean by precisely the same story? So could you give me some overlap of what you're seeing, kind of thing? Because the origin stories for, say, the Greek gods is very different than the origin stories of, say, the Japanese traditions. On the
So
other side.
Japanese and Greek cultures are different. That's a lovely observation.
Yeah.
I think it's evidently true in reality, and I wouldn't expect them to be the same. But the question is, if the Japanese person spoke of that and the Greek person spoke of that, would they tell the same story? Would they see it the same way? That's
no.
probably, I think that's a better way to look at it than to say, from my culture, those two stories look different to me.
Well, obviously they would tell, if they did record an event that you're sort of claiming happened, they would describe it in different ways, sure. But you're sort of saying the complexities are there, and they tell precisely the same story with your words.
I'll give you an example.
Sorry?
I'll give an actual real world example.
Okay.
All right. Having been very, very new in study of religions, I wasn't even thinking about anything that wasn't Abrahamic. Okay. I was only thinking about the Abrahamic religions at that time. I was doing a rendering from chapter 4 of the book of Revelation, and was doing it in public as a painting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A Native American, which I'm a transplant to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yeah.
A Native American whom I did not know. In fact, first Native American I actually met in real life, walked by this painting and pointed at it and said some words that were very foreign to me. He said Red Star Kachina. And I asked him to explain that, and he refused to explain it. He said he didn't have the time for that, but he pointed me toward a book in the library. So I went to that. I found the book, and apparently a white was allowed, something about, something roughly 100 years ago now, to observe the Zuni people and ask them about their religious story. And either he was an artist, I think maybe he had an artist with him. But anyway, did renderings in this book in color of the costumes of all their, I could call them high holy days, for lack of a better term.
Right.
All of their dances and their kachinas and all of this of the Zuni Indian. Okay. So quite literally, this is an underbelly view of chapter 4 of the book of Revelation, where you have the one on the throne, the 4 beasts around God's throne, and the 24 elders around that. This is exactly painted on the chest of the Red Star Kachina. His helmet is spherical and red, and has the 4 medium-sized objects with 6 feathers, not 6 wings, 6 feathers each. And to the specificity that it's he's wearing a pleated apron on his shoulders, which have common earth things on it: man, corn, buffalo, trees, rivers, stuff like that. And then his head is floating above that in appearance. Now, a person could say something like they adopted that from Christianity. No. That religious expression much older than the invasion by Christians.
Okay. But I don't see any wings on that diagram that you've got behind you.
I'm sorry, I'm such a bad artist.
Oh, that's okay.
This is 3 wings, but you're looking upward at them, and you only really see one well, and each of them have 3 wings on each side. I'm sorry, it's not very good.
No, I gotcha. I just, I wouldn't.
But the book of Revelation definitely says that they have 6 wings each.
Okay. Let's see. And I'll just share my screen because I found an image for the red star Kachina.
Probably not. The most common misguidance or misunderstanding that is advertised to the white people in preservation of their traditional religion is actually the Zuni will promote the Hopi expression of the storyteller, which is not the red star Kachina.
The storyteller.
That's a completely different thing.
Okay, if I could find out how to share my screen, that'd be great, but I'm seem to be having problems.
At the bottom of StreamYard's the word present.
Yeah.
And then your tab.
Gotcha. I'm looking for the share button. I'm usually at a participant.
It used to read the word share. You do not have a mental dysfunction.
All right. So that's the depiction that I found of the red. Okay. No, that's not it.
That's
okay,
nothing close to it. That might be Zuni, but it represents the sun.
Well, apparently it's a Hopi, not Zuni.
Red Star Kachina is Zuni. It's not Hopi.
Okay. I mean, I stand corrected. I just went looking and
see what I mean. They presented something from another religion as what they're saying their thing is. It's not their thing.
Okay. Well, it doesn't seem like that. I mean, it's a very primitive kind of. I guess not primitive, but sort of a very symbolic kind of presentation. I could probably find things that would sort of remind me of that diagram.
The Hopi red star is better than the Christian text in many ways. That they actually present a 3-dimensional image instead of just written words with no drawing. And so I actually like the Hopi better than chapter 4 of Revelation.
Well,
the Zuni.
The Zuni, yeah. I guess that I'm saying it doesn't look like that precise specificity that you were talking about.
There is a black circle. There's a white circle with black circles painted on his belly, stomach, chest area, which are 24, 4, and 1, and with the feathers, and exactly in this pattern. And his helmet is that, although you can't clutter the helmet with 24 of the small ones, because then you couldn't see anything else. It would be like enshrouded with them.
Well,
but it is painted on his chest.
Can you find a picture of it at all so we can have a look at this?
I could go to the library and take a photo for you, I suppose.
Oh, sure. I mean, whatever, I guess I wouldn't mind seeing it, but all
my Google searches end up with a Hopi expression, which the Zuni gave people.
Okay. Well, I guess so. Just say it is very, very similar. Okay, so it's just say it is. For the sake of this argument, let's say it's almost identical. So the story is obviously different from the Zuni people to what Christianity says.
Why?
Is it not?
What do you find different about it?
Well, I'm asking. Is it different? Is it
the red star Kachina descends from the sky? It is impressive. It is the main Kachina. It is a very important Kachina. It does not come first. There's signs of its coming. It doesn't land on the earth. It hovers over the earth. It's violent. It's scary. You'll notice.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't sound like the story in the Bible to me.
Okay, what's the part that I left out from the Bible?
The coming of Jesus, the
That's events. Not the Red Star Kachina story. That's not the Arrival of Heaven story. That's a different story.
Okay.
Do they have the story of the friendly stranger from the wilderness who teaches them how to live together in love and compassion and empathy for each other for all of time and that never fails, yeah, they have that story.
Okay. It's just when you say specificity, we're talking about details, so not general elements that are the same. We're talking about specific details.
Sure.
I'm not convinced that sort of just a pattern looking the same as another pattern is the specificity that I would be after in terms of evidence. I think it would be more likely to be just coincidental.
Is color a data point?
Not really, no.
Color is not a data point. It's arbitrary.
Not really, no.
Even though it's the same color. Okay.
I wouldn't say. So here, the thing is that colors, like for instance, Coca-Cola has trademarked their color of red, but that red exists on a spectrum. It's how close you get to it. So if you're saying, hey, they're this color, no, that's not specific at all. It would have to be exactly the same red or exactly the same yellow, which is kind of hard to do because there's so many different colors that we can ascertain.
Well, this is magenta, the true red. It's not. I'm not saying red generally.
Magenta, the true red.
Yeah, the color printers have to use because it's the true red.
Yeah, magenta. So I could use a number of things that are magenta as sort of a parallel. That's fine. It just wouldn't seem very convincing to me that because two things are the same color and have roughly the same shape, it would have to be the same story. I don't think I could get on board.
I don't know why you're leaving out the rest of the data points, though.
What data points?
Count, coloration, shape, comparative size, a wing count or feather count. And you could say that's two different things, I suppose. That a wing is not a feather is not a wing. I guess you could say that. The direction of travel, the fact that it doesn't actually touch the earth, what our reaction to it will be, and its importance. That's not two data points.
Well, no, but they're kind of not very compelling data points either.
Well, obviously for you.
Well, yeah, but the whole bunch of sort of very, very weak data points doesn't add up to strong data, unfortunately. That's why
do you say that?
Well, because they don't. That's not how we use data points.
Isn't it?
No. You can come up with a whole bunch of sort of coincidences in statistical data analysis, for instance. You can come up with a whole bunch of just correlations. It doesn't add up to that being the cause. That's not how we use data.
Sure we do.
Well, no.
We absolutely do.
Well, we use data to correlate things in terms of how much they support one another. We don't use them as these individual points just to say, hey, they have a number of points, therefore it is true. That's not how data analysis works.
No, that's not how data analysis works. If you're talking about Shannon complexity versus information, no, it doesn't work that way. However, you can say to some point of complexity and same data points that it's not a strong case, but at some point it must become a strong case. You certainly can't say something like there's no such thing as cumulative arguments, which is essentially what you're saying.
No, I wouldn't say that, but to me that doesn't sound like a very like an overwhelming amount of data points that would support the evidence that these two things are the same.
Those 7 or 8 data points I just mentioned are not overwhelming.
Right. So I guess that I'm wondering why you believe it.
Because there's thousands of data points, not 8.
Thousands.
Literally thousands of data points. It's not like a handful.
Okay. So what's your best data point? What's the best correlation you have that shows that the precise level of, the precision in the complexity of these stories? What is the best one?
I don't
that you
know.
have?
I guess
Okay.
I've never thought about that, but give me a minute. Maybe.
Yeah.
The best data point out of all the thousands of data points.
Well, I mean, we can't really go through thousands right now, but
I would in my mind in a few moments, if you'd allow it.
No, I get what you're saying. I'm sorry. I do apologize. Yeah, I guess we can find correlations and sort of individual
But that
data
could be
points.
logically fallacious.
What do you mean? Why would that be logically fallacious? Which fallacy?
Correlations are most often logically fallacious, and people put things together by accident or because of bias more often than things are actually correlative.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying we could find correlations between almost anything. We could find
something.
I agree. So that's why I'm sort of asking why you think it shows something.
Because I don't think they're false or loose correlations at all. That's why I'm persuaded. Okay. I mean, I'm not new at thinking. I'm not 14 years old. And I've actually spent quite a lot of time on this. If I had to like gender a few what I think are the best evidence in specificity, that's a tough one. First of all, it's a great question. I don't know exactly, but perhaps something like the relationship between the hero and his guide, that the epic, the standard of the hero. There's a word for that I can't think of right now.
The hero's journey.
Well, the hero's journey is part of the story of the hero. The hero's story itself is there's an encapsulating word that professionals use. I can't recall. It doesn't matter. And the aspects of, because what you want here is you want something that is unusual. You want something that is not predictable in human nature, something that people wouldn't normally come up with through some necessity of nature or society or sexual reproduction, or so. You wouldn't want those things. You want to choose something not those things to make it a decent case for it.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of narratives that come up because we sort of are all human and we do want the same things, and we sort of develop and grow the same ways. So I think a lot of these stories are repeated just because we share a common struggles in our lives. I would put it like that.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you have something like that, then that's great, and maybe just have a think about it and see if you do have anything that would be a standout. Hey, this couldn't have been, the way that humans think developed this particular complexity kind of thing. I'm not demanding it on the spot or anything, Richard. I don't want you to feel like.
I mean, it's the beginning of a conversation. I hope to have many, many more with you. We haven't got off this singular topic yet, so.
Yeah, I get, because I guess I'll sort of give my sort of what comes from me as well, because I did used to believe in the ancient aliens. I think what I believed was slightly on the more side of the aliens were a different species, came down, sort of meddled with DNA, created humans, sort of. So animals were already here, and they just interfered, creating humans, basically. But the reason why is because there's a lot of things that you can sort of say, well, how about and things like the pyramids, and we don't know how they built those, and things that we didn't know how they happened, and we don't know why all these stories are kind of the same. But what I realized is that isn't me not knowing how something happened isn't a reason to believe that I knew the answer. the only evidence that I could come up with was that I didn't know how these things occurred, kind of thing. I didn't know why religions had a common thread. I didn't know why all of these things sort of were correlated. But sort of when I got down to it, I couldn't actually give evidence for these events happening, for the visitors coming and starting a a species. I couldn't actually, I didn't actually have any evidence for that. What I had was questions about events that happened in the past that I felt couldn't be explained through any other means except that that's what I felt. So I guess what I sort of and I don't want to be impolite. I really respect you, Richard. I think you've been absolutely fantastic sharing this with me. I feel like there's questions you have of why does these common things occur, and I don't think you have actual evidence for visitors or the angels coming down and doing these things. And that's not to say, hey, you're wrong, because I can't demonstrate that either. I don't have evidence against it either. So I can't say, hey, you're definitely wrong. I just don't believe it yet because I don't have any evidence for it. Yeah.
You shouldn't believe this based on what I've said, not for certain. I mean, for certain, you should not.
Okay.
There was very metered and well reasoned out logical purpose in me saying that, starting this conversation with, I rejected for pretty rational reasons, for a 12-year-old rationale.
Absolutely.
And maintained that until I was 42, where I was shown a reading frame that indicates the following, that I'm persuaded is correct. Okay.
So the reason
frame, that I said that, and in that order, is for this exact reason. I didn't have a desire. My desire was loose women, other people's wives, and rum and coke, and Yamaha 1700 Silverado. Those were my desires. So let's not make the common, although it's typically true, mistake in my case that a person would find these things and then try to formulate an answer that justifies the lack of knowledge in some kind of a way that would make them okay with it. Not necessarily that needs to make sense. It doesn't. But as long as they have an explanation that seems okay to them, it's probably resolution enough for the conundrum of, where did this come from? How does that exist there? I had no such interest in any such things. I could not have cared less. I was not interested in justifying religious stories. And I never noticed that there's some kind of problem with a pyramid or whatever. And frankly, I didn't give a crap. I really don't care about it right now, as a matter of fact. That there can be mysteries. I'm okay with that. That's science's whole job, is to say what. Well, when we find the what, they'll publish that and we'll know about it. But I don't consider those things to be problems. Now, if you want to talk about hydraulic systems, pneumatic systems, motor-driven systems, machining, if you want to have a conversation about drill sizes and why there's 3 different kinds, I'm more than happy to have those conversations. Always interested in those things. Okay. But trying to justify a religion is just not a thing I do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's not an accurate assumption there.
Yeah. So, but what puts this in the category of religion? Because to my mind,
anti-religion, actually.
Yeah, to my mind, it's sort of, you're not saying there's a God, and you're not prescribing any form of worship or any
definitely not.
Yeah, so it comes to my mind, what actually makes your particular belief system a religion rather than just a set of beliefs.
I think it's the reality of the situation is what I'm persuaded to believe, and that it's not a religious stance whatsoever. There's There's no ritual. There's no certain things that you must do at certain times. There's no certain places you must be. There are no certain foods you must or must not eat. And the definition of God, as far as I can see, is a set of social structures. And they might actually be the perfect set of social standards. It's hard for me to tell from where I live. But nothing about some supernatural, beyond time, self-defeating in classical logic, quad omni critter. Nothing about. I don't see anything about that.
Yeah. It's just, I guess from my perspective, you're kind of an atheist because you don't believe in a God at all.
Well, I believe in the Father, and I believe the Father is an atheist, and I believe I'm an atheist.
The Father. So by Father, you mean the head of the Elohim?
I mean the one who has the privilege of conducting end times, which is a horrible term. It's beginning times, but people call it end times.
Okay, so it's just misunderstood by the Christian. But is the Father an individual, or is that more a group of angels, or where does the Father come into it?
I'm actually thinking of writing a short comic story called Godspeed and Pooped Too. Godspeed and Pooped Too. Okay. Including like eating food and wiping their butts and stuff.
Right.
That they're just as physical as we are. See, okay, in a snow globe method of looking at the Earth, and that there is nothing beyond the dome, there's no reason to invent a telescope. You see?
Well, no. Right. Yeah.
And they didn't have one anyway. Galileo 1610, 1 year predated by the King James Version. And that's significant. Matters later. They didn't think of there being stuff out there. They didn't think of it that way. See, it's unnecessary complexity, and it doesn't gain you a darn thing to say multiverse theory and that God's on some other plane of existence. All heaven need to be, it could be just as solid as your computer. It could be just as colorful as the rainbow. It could be the size of this entire galaxy. That would have no relevance if it's just far enough away.
Yeah. No, I agree. All of these concepts could be, but I guess it doesn't really address who the Father is.
He is a living fleshly being who resided on an earth and did a very specific job to assist and be the bridge between his Father and his people.
Right. So that was the progenitor of sort of humankind kind of thing.
No, Adam is the progenitor. That is Abraham. That is to say Moses.
Okay, so why you say the bridge between his people? What do you mean by a bridge?
That's what the word pontiff or the Pope claims to be, is that bridge. A pontiff, a bridge builder. So you can. It's the idea translator, the person who actually ends up with what is actually true, despite anyone's opinions. And he helps people to understand what that truth is compared to what they're seeing and experiencing at the time. It's very interesting. You'll never find an Old Testament challenge to the existence of heaven. You'll never find someone anywhere in the text saying something like, show me this heaven. And it's the most natural question to ask. I've heard Matt Dillahunty ask this. I've heard Aaron Ra ask this question. It seems very intuitive. Show me these angels. Show me this God. Show me this heaven. Very intuitive questions, human nature. No one ever asks that in any of the stories. It's because the story is set in end times and heaven is literally in the physical sky, physical heaven. And that's why no one ever asks that question, is because there's no debate in first person experience.
But the Father, what origin does the Father have? Is that one of us earthbound humans, or is it a human from this other planet, or is it one of the sort of bovine Elohim, or is it so? Where do they come from? And so they build a bridge between the angels that seeded the world and us. What origin?
His us, not our us. His us. It's a different occurrence.
Okay. Yeah. No, I got you. The angels were his us, right?
Yeah. No. Well, some of the angels are his us.
Okay.
There's. From what I can understand, in terraforming, there's been at least 23 other occurrences before this one. Human nature being what it is, misunderstandings being what their religions developing, superstitions developing, they need the reality explained to them. There's a person selected from that past planet, not this particular planet, that was selected to be that pontiff and bridge that gap, and is called the hero. So there's 23 heroes before this one.
Okay, so these 23 terraforming occurrences. How did you come to believe that there were 23, and so what provided the justification?
The text itself. It describes the rewards to the people, which are pretty darn general. No more crying, live forever, live with God. You know the promises, right? And then there's special promises, given a new name, heaven will be named after you, seated at the right hand of the Father, given a crown, given glory, share the glory of God, all this stuff, judge the people, be the ruler, all that. And those are obviously not promises to everyone. You can't have one thing named, I don't know, 144,000 to 8 billion names. That just gets confusing. So it's talking about a singular individual, and in the text is indicating the singular masculine in the word his. That's a pretty decent translation. It's not a they. It can't be read they. These promises. And they're obviously the promises to the hero, in this case called Jesus Christ, which is not his only name, but it's a name he has. And then it's said that there's 23 already enjoying those promises.
But how
does there's only one way to enjoy those promises is to do the job of the hero.
So, are you talking about 23 occurrences on Earth, or 23 throughout the rest of the sort of universe?
No, in the throne room, there's 23 other occurrences. There's 23 others enjoying the promises to the hero.
So what's the throne room? Where is that?
It's chapter 4 of the book of Revelation, the throne room of heaven.
Okay. Yeah.
Not that I expect you to be a Christian or have the Bible memorized. I don't expect.
No. That's fine. That's fine. I just we're sort of going from sort of doctrine to some very, very.
What's the doctrine part?
Well,
I'm
the
curious.
doctrine is what's in Revelations. So,
what do you mean doctrine of what's in Revelation?
Well, this is the church doctrine kind of thing, sort of. Because when in my mind somebody says Revelations, I immediately think of the church doctrine, because
I would say that's a mistake. You should throw away all of Christianity, not parts of it.
Well, I guess that we're jumping from text to your interpretation, I guess.
Sure.
So
of course,
is sort of that these events are taking place in a physical universe. So I guess in my mind, I'm trying to separate what I know about the doctrine from what your interpretation is, because I don't want them to meld into one another. I don't want to.
Yeah, that would be a mess.
No, I got you. I understand that you don't believe the interpretation that the churches have made. I get that. I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I'm trying to say, okay, there's a throne room, and if heaven is sort of, the universe kind of thing, and these extraterrestrial organisms doing things, where is that in the actual universe? Where are we talking about here?
Did you just say heaven is the universe? I don't know what that means.
Well, where does the throne? Well, you said the throne room of heaven.
Yeah, that's the name that they gave very recently to that section of the book. And the numbers, they just stuck numbers in there too, Old and New Testament. Those numbers also don't mean anything. In fact, the commas and in the Old Testament and the periods and the what is and is not a sentence or paragraph was also just decided by churches. None of that's real. I'm just using it as a glossary so you know what part I'm talking about.
Yeah. I guess I'm getting a little confused, because are you saying there is no sort of heavens where God resides? What are they talking about when they're talking about heavens where gods reside?
The reason that Yahweh doesn't appear until after Adam is because Yahweh depends on Adam. Adam had to create Yahweh because he was creating a society. He had a woman now, and then he thought about it.
Right.
We're gonna have reproduction. These other things reproduce. We're gonna reproduce too. That was kind of the point of them making this thing, so I can have my own kind, because I'm a very different.
Sorry, I just want to clarify that all of this was somewhere else, not Earth. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
That all of this happened somewhere else.
Yes, right. Adam happened somewhere else. Yes.
So with the text sort of saying that God created man, that God is the other sort of Bavinidae.
I don't know where you're going to find a claim like that. There is no claim like that. That's a Christian assumption that you should throw away. What it does read is that Elohim made man.
I don't think it said that. I think it
yes,
said,
it does.
Does it?
Your Christians are objectively wrong about this.
Oh,
I can prove they're wrong about this.
Well, prove to me that they're wrong about it.
There is no Yahweh till after Adam in the text. You can ask any scholar.
But
you can just read it. It's Elohim, Elohim, Elohim. It becomes Yahweh and Jehovah later.
Right.
That's why they call it pre Jehovah and post Jehovah. That's why those.
In my head, they're the same being, but okay, gotcha.
No.
I understand what you're saying. Okay, so I understand what you're saying. They're two different things. So the Elohim created humans, Adam and Eve, and then Yahweh came later. And are you saying Yahweh was part of the human slave order kind of thing? Or
Yahweh is a set of 7 spirits. Those are, they're spirits. There's nothing in the Bible about this God Yahweh having even consciousness or personality or will or anything like that. But what it does say is that he's spirit, and then he lists the spirits. And the spirits are abstracts and ideals, and their social standards is what they are.
So what do you mean by spirits? Like, can you give me a definition of what a spirit is?
I love the Cowboys. I have the spirit of cowboy football.
Well, I mean, that's sort of just a metaphor.
That's the way it's being used.
So Yahweh's just a metaphor for what?
A set of standards for running a society. The claim is that they're the perfect standards causing a utopian society. Now, they are real standards, things we recognize as nouns. Mm-hmm. We have definitions for them. The translations are pretty direct. Those are the most original ideas from the oldest text we can find.
Right.
They seem consistent within each other.
Mm-hmm.
They're not self-defeating or anything like that. They're decent standards for a human being.
Yep. Okay. So Yahweh's just a set of standards for running society. So it's just basically a sort of a moral framework kind of thing is what you're saying.
Knowledge, wisdom, counsel, understanding, fear, power, and conservation.
Okay.
They're ideals,
So this spirit is just a sort of framework that they have created to run the society that they're creating.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just making sure I've got you 100%.
It's just that Adam is really smart, and he just sat down and thought about all this stuff and said, well, what am I going to need if I start a big family and run away? Okay. What am I going to need? Well, I'm going to need food. I'm going to need like physical support. I'm going to need materials and supplies. I'm going to need minerals and all this stuff. And what's going to happen if I do this? Well, the following is going to happen. I mean, he'd already run probably something between half and 2/3 of a large government. It's not like he didn't know what would be needed to do something like this. He knew.
Yeah, it's sort of the sort of the way that you speak is very specific. That you sort of that you believe this very strongly, and
I'm fully persuaded. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm wondering how you came about this belief that Yahweh wasn't referring to a god and was spirit, and
well, it is God.
It's happened.
That is what God for man is.
Okay. I do apologize. It
wasn't offensive.
Well, that's okay. I just don't want to misrepresent you at all, right? So if I do say anything wrong, just correct me, Richard. Honestly, mate, just let me know, because I don't want to misrepresent what you think.
It's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you in the first place.
Oh,
I appreciate your honesty.
Oh, my pleasure. That's the least I can do, really. But what I'm trying to get at is that these sort of descriptions of what happened and how and why, I guess I don't have the evidence that you seem to be, fully justified in your belief that these things occurred. And I'm wondering how you got this evidence, how this came to you, because a lot of it seems to be these events happened, but I don't know why you believe. So we're sort of talking epistemology here, sort of. So why you believe the things that you believe.
Sure.
And so, do you think you can share to me how you came about the belief that humans did do these things, and Adam and Eve did do these things, and that happened?
I think I'm much better at an internal critique, but I'll throw something at the fan and see what bounces off. I am fully persuaded because of personal or anecdotal things, experiences that I have had, which you probably wouldn't even consider to be evidential.
Well, that's okay. I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the nature of anecdotal evidence.
Sure.
It's important to the individual, not necessarily important to anybody else.
Right.
Although for anyone who thinks that's not evidence, consider crimes in courts. Anecdotal evidence is actual evidence. What a person says, what they do, what is the truth of the matter, and what does it all mean? It's the very nature of investigation of many crimes. Anyway,
I might push back on that slightly, because eyewitness accounts and anecdotal sort of evidence isn't considered the best evidence in a court. No. It's actually physical evidence, like finding stuff, and the reliability of anecdotal evidence entirely relies on the credibility of the person. Like, you're not going to believe the person accused of the crime saying, "Hey, my anecdotal evidence is that I didn't do it." It just, there is a sort of asterisk with eyewitness accounts, and they're considered pretty unreliable, because even the most well-meaning person can see something and get details absolutely wrong.
I'm probably the worst. I've got no higher education. I don't have any degrees in anything whatsoever. I'm not versed in theology. I've never studied any of the philosophers. I'm like the worst person to be talking about this stuff. I've got almost no background for it.
I don't think that's a issue, to be honest with you, Richard, because you could have all the degrees in the world and sort of say, well, I had this experience, and it's still anecdotal evidence. It doesn't change that. The only thing that sort of degrees get you, and I do concede that in society, people do look up to that kind of thing, but that's not really a reflection of your credibility at all. The reason why that people give such a lot of authority to scientists and people with degrees is because of the process they're using is reliable. That they're not saying, "Hey, I just found out this and that's my anecdote." They're actually saying, "Here's the process I used, and here's the methodology to show why it's reliable and we can rely on it." If they just came up to me and said, "Hey, I did an experiment through this thing with bacteria and a peacock leapt out," it would be just as anecdotal evidence as yours. They would have to show me the experiments that they did and that it was reliable and things like that. So I don't count that as being a negative at all. Everybody's on the same playing field, if you will, where anecdotal evidence is concerned. It's just that some people, if you're aware that I'm a complete liar and I keep lying, my anecdotal evidence probably isn't going to be as strong. But, I generally do give people the benefit of the doubt and understand that, I can never get their personal experience you have. You can never get the personal experience I have. Sure. I take it for what it's worth, absolutely. But go ahead. Do relate to personal experience that you had.
And on that, William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, Richard Carrier, Rob Rowe, all these, they are ignoring huge chunks of the text to keep what they think it's saying. And they are definitely cherry picking. I can show that definitively. No, what I find, it's my trust in this, which I've been trying to approach these conversations as an internal critique, so that the other person is not committed to anything and we can just talk about it theoretically. Sure. But I am fully persuaded. That's no straw man of my position. But I'm fully persuaded for reasons not the text. Okay? I'm fully persuaded because of personal experiences of things that I have had in knowledge with no prior experience and cannot have been exposed to, which were true in reality and falsifiable. That's what I found persuasive. Now, does the reading frame I was first given for reading specifically at first just David and Goliath, and was expounded upon later, that it's using anthropomorphization and natural surroundings, like animism, to talk about future events. It's not a history lesson whatsoever. Which future events the authorship claims to be able to actually make them happen in reality have not happened, and there's no evidence for those events. But there shouldn't be evidence for future events. That makes sense. Right. Is the claim of the reading frame that I've adopted, and so far seems to work, where there are 40-ish, at least 30, I never actually counted them, falsifiable points in the story of David and Goliath, where David represents the planet Mercury and Goliath represents the planet Jupiter. Saul represents the sun. Nathan, the son of Saul, a smaller king, and centerpiece and fully clothed and decked out in all the regalia, is the eventual ignition of Jupiter, realizing it as a short-term star. How short, I don't know. 5 years, 100 years, I have no idea. And that all of the character stories align to the stories of the gods fighting in the skies. The fact that we named the planets after those gods, and by the way, appropriately, I haven't looked at all of the names of all the gods as planets, but the Hebrew names work really well. And so do the Greek names. That there are points of falsification there that, if they were not true, and I know they were outside of my learning and knowledge range, because I know what I studied and what I didn't. I know what TV shows I watched. I know what books I read. I know I didn't accidentally trip over the chemistry of the moons over Jupiter. I never tripped over that. And I wouldn't have put that together with that story in the first place. However, if the story progresses as it claims it could, there are certain things in physics and chemistry that would be necessity to the story. They couldn't be otherwise. Now, are those things true? Yes. Are they outside of my knowledge range and experience? Yes. I was a lot of things, but astronomer and physics major, I was not.
Yeah. So I guess the problem with future events is, yeah, you shouldn't expect them to have happened because they are in the future.
Because they're,
but at the same time, you can't falsify them because they are in the future and we haven't gotten to the future.
Not exactly. You can show that a potential is impossible, that something is potentially impossible. You can show that.
Well, yeah, sure, but that's only within sort of logic, specifically, like, I will find a married bachelor kind of thing. If you say, well, I'll find a bachelor with red hair and a kilt and say carrying a scepter, you can always say, well, that's in the future, it hasn't happened yet. And there's nothing logically impossible about that statement. But the fact remains that you might not find that individual, right? That may not ever happen. And because it's in the future, it's unfalsifiable. You can't say, hey, that's not going to happen, because you can just say, well, that's in the future.
Right. Now, what I'm saying is you can't turn gold into water. That's what I'm saying. There are certain things you can add energy, add matter to a thing and increase its complexity, and you can split it into its base parts. But if the base parts aren't there, you can show the base parts aren't there.
Yeah, well, I think there's some things that are physically impossible, sure, but we're not talking about physically impossible things for these future events. We're talking about things that are physically possible and logically possible. So, but still, just because they are physically and logically possible doesn't give any indication to whether that future event, it's still unfalsifiable.
Unless it made some claim that was not possible, then it would be
falsifiable, sure. But that's no reason to believe the claim of future events because it hasn't happened yet.
Right. It's because my personal experience is that I trust and have faith that these events will happen because of what has happened, which is not in the stories.
Right. So this David and Goliath story, referring to the planets and Mercury being David and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
How was that falsifiable? Like, so how did you predict? What did you predict, and how was it falsifiable?
Let's say for instance that there were a claim in there that his that Goliath's helmet were made of, I don't know, has to be copper.
Okay.
Or tin or lead or any number of metals that they're aware of. But no, the story reads brass. Okay. Now, first of all, brass, not the best thing that they had for shielding, not the best things that they had for swords. They had low grade steel for one thing.
They probably had as well, yeah.
What's that?
They probably had bronze as well.
They definitely had bronze, yes.
Yeah, which would be
brass, not great. Okay, you wouldn't prefer brass for the strength of it. It's too damned heavy.
Sure.
If you want a certain strength, say you want to stop an arrow with it, you're going to have to make that so damn thick. You're not going to want to carry the damn thing around. I don't care how big you are. You just need a bigger helmet anyway. Okay. Sure. So intuitively, it already doesn't make sense. If you wanted to show off, it would have been gold. It wouldn't have been brass. Brass is called, to those people in that time, they called it bell metal, which is like saying junk metal. That's the kind of junk that you use to make bells with and kids' toys and stuff like that. You don't. In fact, part of the definition of brass is that it's dross. It's not shiny. It loses its shine real quick because it's not a noble metal, of course. So, okay. So, and then you have the occurrences themselves, like when David decapitates the giant, the army of Philistine runs away and the army of Israel chases. Through the series there, you have planets colliding and moons colliding with each other, fracturing. Obviously, they're not going to stay together at those kinds of weights and masses and impacts. Fracturing, a series of chemical and electrical reactions causing a large expansion, and that expansion hurling some of the chunks in several directions. It makes perfect sense that if we had an ignition by the means necessary that's described in the story, sorry, that was said poorly, by the means described in the story, those are not necessities. Then you would have chunks of moons hitting the outer and inner asteroid belts referred to as the asteroid belt. And there would be collisions there. And that would, of course, like an extremely complicated game of billiards, would send chunks of stuff flying in every direction, everything toward the sun anyway. So I say that it's falsifiable in the way that it's plausible in the future, not in the way that it would naturally happen or that it has to happen. But with intelligent interference, it is evident to me that highly unlikely things can and do happen. For instance, these glasses. These glasses happened. The chances of them happening by themselves pretty dang slim.
But you're talking about this event happening in the future at some point.
Sure.
And as I sort of pointed out, that nothing in the future is falsifiable by nature.
Right. Did you instead want some of my anecdotal stories?
Well, no, you sort of said that this story explained there was 40-ish or 30-something, you haven't counted them, falsifiable points in this particular story of David.
Right.
But when we're talking about falsifiability and testable predictions, we're sort of going, okay, if let's take one from evolution, because it makes a number of testable predictions, right? So Darwin sort of said if the dinosaurs turned into birds, we should find a bird with unfused wing fingers. And then we found the bird with unfused wing fingers, right? Sure. It's a falsifiable claim that has in fact been falsified or basically shown true because it hasn't been falsified. We did find it. So when you're looking at sort of, well, this will happen in the future, it's not so much a claim that's past falsification as one that can be falsified but hasn't been yet. Right. So
maybe I'm answering poorly.
Is this something that is supposed to have happened in the past, that planets have collided together?
So the story is very old in many religions, as I'm sure you're aware, but it has not physically happened.
Right. So I guess in sort of my terms, I would sort of place this in the realms of a hypothesis, right? Sort of saying
that's that's generous.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not. So the problem I have with these sort of things that will happen in the future, and it's fine to make that sort of hypothesis, if you will, but we only know that they're false when and so to me the position is, well, I will reserve judgment until this thing happens, and then I will believe it. So I guess number one is that your interpretation of the text to mean planets is very loose. I don't see a reason why you would interpret it that way.
It depends on how exacting you want to be, actually. I've seen it asserted that the youngest planet in the inner solar system is Venus, and that it might have actually been rogue at some point and trapped into its orbit. And I find that interesting. We are so riveted with Mars because we see signs that Mars could have, in some past very distant time, been an Earth-like planet.
Sure. So
there could have been, we think there might have been water, there might have been atmosphere, there might have been life forms that were residing. The beginnings of simple, what's that?
It's also the closest.
That makes it easier. It's not the closest.
I believe it's closer than Venus. Isn't it closer than Venus?
I could have them backwards. It doesn't matter.
Well, I mean,
on that point,
in any case, Venus is a non-starter just because
what is it, raining methane there or something?
Yeah,
it's pretty much a non. Yeah. Okay, so it lists Saul and then David does not mention Saul's son ever in this part of the story. Saul's son appears out of nowhere later on. There is no prince. And David, and then it says David has a total of 7 big brothers, but only 3 come to the war. It introduces them in size order. After introducing them in size order, they go to the war and stand out of size order, where the biggest one is the only one who speaks. He stands in the middle. The next biggest one actually stands behind him. These are chickens. The littlest one stands out front. And their names are Abinadab, Eliab, and Shammah. Eliab is El, making a God claim. Who cares about the rest of it? It's a speaker making a God claim. Abinadab means recent volunteer, and in the position of Mars, Shammah, which is the Hebrew word for something that was reasonably cool and came to ruin.
Okay.
So the names and the count fit all very neatly, to the extent that what Goliath, the Philistine, the giant of Gath, literally means is a large rolling migratory who becomes obvious during the wine press. That's what those words should have been translated as. They were kind of under-translated.
Okay.
So
you're saying he's a Gath giant. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a pun in it too. I laughed the first time I read Gath.
Bit of humor for the audience there.
Yeah. I actually laughed. Now you're kidding, but I'm kidding too. But there's a language problem. You can't have that without knowledge of both languages. But yeah, it sounds like I have a lisp and I'm saying gas giant.
Well, that's not compelling, but sure, I get what you're saying about
that part's not compelling.
Yeah. I get what you're saying about the order of the sons, but it's still very tenuous to me to sort of say, well, these instantly mean
any handful of points is tenuous.
Well, sure. But I guess that was the first point, that was sort of a tenuous connection to planets. I'm not entirely convinced that that's what they're referring to.
That's fine.
And the second is that it was sort of said that it was falsifiable, but that to me is not falsifiable.
A series of chemical reactions is definitely falsifiable.
Yes, but not in the future. Like not right now. For that event.
Sure. For instance, if I claimed that I could turn gold into titanium, turn that into water, and then turn that into hydrogen. Sorry, that one actually made sense. And then turn that into helium. If I made a claim like that, you'd go bullshit.
Well, the point is that maybe, so if I made a claim sort of that I could fuse hydrogen into helium, right? I could perform cold fusion kind of thing. And you would say, okay, we'll do it. And I sort of say, well, not now, but in the future. That may be possible and it may be true, but you can't tell whether it is true or not. And I don't really have justification for believing that to be true.
Sure.
I would need to show that it is going to happen with some certainty before I should place my confidence in that. And you mentioned that you have faith in it, and I want to go back to this sort of faith claim, because or this faith position that you have, because as far as I can tell, you're not part of a religion as such, or it doesn't seem to be a religious position that you hold on these events.
No.
It seems to be an entirely naturalistic one. So what do you mean by faith then? Because faith can be used. It probably isn't what I'm thinking of that you're using it.
No, it's probably exactly what you're thinking. I'm persuaded of things that I can't directly show to be true in reality. And that's not always unreasonable. It depends on the situation and even the anecdotal evidence. I look like one of my brothers, although I don't look like much of my mom or my dad. Although I kind of got my mom's nose, maybe, but her dad broke her nose, so mine was never broken. So we don't know if my nose really looks like hers as an adult or not. And some of my other people who I grew up with kind of look like me and kind of look like each other, and they kind of look like mom and dad. But I never had a genetic test to show that those are my mom and dad. And besides me and the brother that really look a lot alike, could have been adopted as twins.
Okay, so
or siblings. So it's kind of, I mean, is it unreasonable for me to say that's my mom and dad? Well, no, it's pretty darn reasonable. And if you have that level of evidence for something, even though you don't have proof of it, you have only anecdotal or experiential evidence, doesn't mean it's unreasonable to believe. And that's essentially what's happened to me. Is I've had personal experiences that were situational, that where I was able to make knowledge claims before the experimentation, testing, and falsifiability ever occurred, and those things did stand up to false, were true, even though they're outside of my possible knowledge range.
Yeah, so I think that, to my mind, you've said something that's kind of contradictory.
Okay.
And you know, I'll run it by you and see what you think, because you sort of said that faith is you're persuaded of things you can't show. So we're talking about things you can't observe, because just seeing something isn't, you know, when you say show it. No, I gotcha. Things you can't observe the effects of them.
No, I said you can observe them and you can show them, but you won't find it persuasive. That's what I said.
Well, that's not really what you said faith was. So run it by me. Faith is you're persuaded of things you can't show. And by show, I mean things that you can't observe or demonstrate.
What I mean by that? Well, I can't have shown and demonstrated and made knowledge claims prior to the investigation of the thing. That is, there was a predictive power to it. And in using the predictive power, shown things that were true in reality, which were outside of my experience range. I simply couldn't have experienced them to put those things together. Those things are relatively unrelated. And falsified them in the moment. And they were true in reality. They couldn't be falsified. They were falsifiable. They couldn't be falsified.
Right.
And that's happened in real time in my experience and with other people around me several times in the last 10 years. But just like right now, your brain is going, what the hell is he talking about? And if I'm understanding him, is that even possible? And I don't think that, is he claiming prayer? And you're doing all those things in your head right now. That's because this you would not find persuasive.
No, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about my epistemology. I'm talking about yours. So if you've experienced these things, and you know, I'm going to sort of take it at your word. You've experienced these things, and you have this evidence because it's occurred to you. And from your point of view, then you don't really need faith to believe it, right?
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
I have the personal experience, which gives me a trust relationship. Because of that, I have faith in the future events will be carried out.
Right.
I don't have faith in existent things that are falsifiable.
Right. But the whole, I guess what I'm saying is that that's sort of one criteria, that you don't need faith if you have evidence of these things coming true and these things occurring to you. But it seems like, at least to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're sort of saying these things will occur in the future. So you can't possibly have had experience with these things coming true
if that's my faith position.
True in the future.
That's where I hold the faith.
Right, but you can't have had experience of these things coming true if them coming true is in the future. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Of course, I'm really convinced I understand that you can't show future events.
Yes.
Yes, I have a faith position on the future events.
Right.
I have a trust position on the past events.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Sure. So what in the past events has sort of have you got your trust that the future events will come true?
Two things, and they're completely not answering your question at all.
Great. Fantastic.
I want to have a second conversation. I want to mirror this to my show, to my channel.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And
No,
really off topic, I am coming up on missing my third cigarette.
Okay. Well, I mean, we can wrap it up fairly soon. Maybe
we're going to have to, because my brain is starting to like get.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem. No problem. No problem at all.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you just a quick answer, and then maybe hear some of your closing thoughts and all that sort of thing. I'd love to hear that, because you've almost spoken none about your mind, and I feel like I haven't learned anything about you at all.
I'm more than like, next time we'll take it up with me. That's not a problem at all. I can go through my history and my journey through life. Sure, absolutely.
So the short answer is I've literally known things I couldn't have experience of. Okay. That's the short answer. And to give an example of it, a couple years back, my eldest, I'm so used to saying next eldest, sorry. My eldest half brother, because who I thought was my eldest brother wasn't, because we didn't meet this half brother until he was 51. Mm-hmm. My mom had a child out of wedlock when she was 16, and she was Catholic. You already know what happened. He got given up for adoption. Right. Great guy. Love him to death. He had some kind of weird, like a pneumonia virus attacking the outside of his lungs, causing protein strands to develop in his, choking him out. He was just slowly suffocating because his lungs couldn't expand. These proteins were just building and building and building.
That's nasty. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nasty. So he had to have a physical operation. I was between jobs. I was between girlfriends and wives and stuff. I had nothing else better to do. I did not have a vehicle at the time. I still don't. I'm not making claims of grandeur. I didn't have a vehicle, so I had a sibling drop me off at a truck stop. The trucker got to Albemarle, North Carolina, about 2:30 in the morning. He dropped me off on an exit that had no signs other than exit number and road name. I was under the impression that in Albemarle there would probably be one hospital, because I knew it was a relatively small town. But there were not. There were two hospitals. Then I couldn't remember the name of the hospital. I didn't bring directions. I didn't bring a map. 2:30 in the morning, the cab driver said he couldn't help me because I didn't even know the name of the hospital. I started walking and what I would call praying or meditating, which is, it's like tasting for feelings that aren't your own, if that even makes sense.
Okay.
Which led me to a hospital. Seeing the sign on the hospital, I recognized the word as being the right word for the name of the hospital. I did not visit two hospitals at all. I go in there. They do have my brother as a patient. They set me up in his room, gave me a nice recliner in case I wanted to go to sleep. He woke up in about 3 or 4 more hours and said, hello, coming out from under anesthesia and then natural sleep. He asked me how I got there. I told him what I just told you. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, you walked here. What route did you take? I said, I don't know. I don't know this town. You know? He goes, well, what did you see? So I described in order the things that I saw: the gas station, what kind of housing, were they box housing? Were they nice houses? How much forest, how many turns I took, and then the amount of time that I'd evidently taken to walk. Mm-hmm. We calculated that I had walked in just under 4 hours, 12 miles, taking no wrong turns whatsoever, and never running and never stopping too. I mean, just a reasonable pace. Now, I don't know. In fact, I probably couldn't take you to that hospital right now. I certainly didn't know where the hospital was in his neighboring town, part of his town kind of thing. where he lived at the time. I mean, I'd been to his house a couple times, but never had gone like downtown and all that sort of thing. So normally right now, people ask me questions like, did you see signs for hospitals? There were no signs for hospital.
No, I gather.
People ask me how many other delusions I've had. I even had one couple that suggested I could have had a very advantageous brain hemorrhage. It's not, the real world isn't like the movie Phenomenon where a brain dysfunction makes you higher functioning. That's not how it really works. Everything you're already as good as you're going to get. Everything else just going to hurt you.
Well, I think that also, I mean, one possible thing is that under stress, that the brain can delve deep into its subconscious and pull out things that it ordinarily would never be able to access, like in a non-stress situation. Yeah. So the brain has an amazing ability for complete recall. Like when people are put under hypnotism, they can recall things that they almost shouldn't know, but it's just the brain has taken notice, it's recorded it, stuff that in the memory you could not draw upon it if you wanted to, but under hypnosis someone can bring up these incredible minute details that are just insane.
So you're saying I could have tapped into my subconscious in a conscious state and drawn out information that I needed at the time?
Yeah, under a very stressful situation, you could
I wasn't stressed.
Okay, well, I mean, your brother being in hospital's kind of stressful. I mean, but
I already heard when the phone call came, he was already in recovery.
Right, yeah.
By the time I knew he was hurt, he was already well.
Yeah,
but I still want to go see him. I love the guy.
Yeah. There are cases of people sort of bringing up things that they'd only seen once, or they'd browsed past and not even paid attention.
Sure.
And in a situation I think that's more explainable, but
I'm persuaded that we have perfect memories, but we don't bring everything to the front of our memory constantly because we'd just be littered with trash. And you couldn't live like that.
Well, I don't think that's the case, but yeah, it's too much for the conscious brain to process, and so it just filters it down into things that you do need and then dumps everything else in memory. And
by the way, when I'm driving a car, I'm not trying to concentrate on how to tie my shoes. I'm thinking of those things one at a time as well.
Well, Richard, I want to thank you so very much. I know I used to smoke myself years and years ago, so I know how bad it can get. Didn't what hurt?
When you smoke yourself?
I think it was a big mistake. I'm glad I quit. I think quitting was.
I thought you meant like a large roasting oven. And maybe a smoker, and maybe serve part of yourself to others. That kind of smoke yourself?
No, I'm not into giving myself up for cannibalism, if that's what you're suggesting. No.
Okay, well, no, I took it wrong.
Yeah. So I quit probably about 10 years ago now. It was rough, really rough to quit. I kind of encourage everyone to try though, because it's terrible for your health.
And there was something else that you said that was really Australian. And I thought it was just so endearing because I've just never heard that put together that way. You gave me a challenge, something that I should consider later. You called it "Have a Think."
Have a think, yeah. That's definitely very.
I loved that. I was like, "Have a think." Yeah. Wow, I got to think about having a think now. Thank you.
Yeah. It's sort of thinkception. Yeah, why not? That is a pretty Australian thing to say. Actually, I have been told I don't have a very bad accent, and I'm actually pretty understandable for an Australian. So I'm grateful for that. But Richard,
I haven't had any problems.
Yeah, well, I kind of I used to work on phones in call centers and things, and you'd get all kinds of people. So being understandable and being understood is one of the things that I was kind of trained in. But I'll certainly go into all of that next time we talk. Absolutely, Richard. I'll sort of say where my journey in life took me through and everything. I think it'd be really good if you understand where I'm coming from as well. But it's been a delight, Richard. It's been really good. I've been very interested in your particular viewpoint here. And I kind of, not exactly, but kind of used to share it. So I think I realize that people are like, oh, you're deluded and things. I don't think that at all, mate. I really do give you, your beliefs are, your own, and you are fully justified to believe whatever you want. I don't, I want you to understand.
I don't think people are. Sorry, I'm not that
Well,
forgiving.
I think they are. I think that sort of people can believe whatever they want. When they're making knowledge claims, I think then you have to say, well, you've got to justify that knowledge claim that X, Y, or Z. I think that's where I would draw the line. But if people want to believe what they want to believe, I can disagree. I can think they're wrong and still respect the person. I think that it's justified to believe.
For me, it depends on what the claim was.
Yeah, I suppose so.
I have trouble continuing to respect someone who sees the curvature on the undersides of clouds and says the Earth is flat.
Yeah, I guess there are some things that their belief is impactful on another person, like if they're racial, like a Nazi or something, and things like that. I must admit, I do have a lot of trouble justifying that, maybe in that sense, when it's really detrimentally affects somebody else, then maybe we should say, hey, you don't have a right to that belief. But I think if you're not harming anybody, then go buck wild. I don't care. Even flat earthers, I get that. I think they're absolutely wrong. I think they're totally unjustified. But at the same time, they're welcome to believe whatever they want to believe, because it's a free world kind of thing.
But they're humans. They're our brothers and sisters, and maybe someday they'll accept a concept that actually makes sense in the observable reality. That's what I'm hoping for.
Absolutely. But Richard, it's been a pleasure, and I want to wish you all the best. I've got your email, so I'll keep in touch and we'll line something up. And the conversation will be on me and my worldview rather than you and yours, so I can explain where I'm coming from and everything. So
I'd love to understand that.
I mean, do you do anything on your channel? Do you want me to appear on your channel next time? So, sort of pay back the favor by having me come on?
Maybe 1 or 2 or 5 shows from now, or weeks from now.
Okay.
Something like that. Possibly we could work out something for you.
I generally do debate, so I don't have a lot scheduled on mine. So if you do want to come on mine again, no problem. If you want to wait for yours to free up, no problem as well. Like, just keep in touch.
It's work schedule. It's not that my channel is over flooded with content. That's not it.
For whatever reason, whatever your schedule is, no problem at all. So keep in touch, send me an email, and we can work something out. It's not a problem.
You're very generous.
My pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to say or sort of, end with before we go out?
Yes, all of you. And this might be hard for you to believe right now. I love you. And I look forward to the day that we're all great friends.
Fantastic. All right, Richard, love you too, mate. And take care. And I hope to see you soon.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's been a pleasure. I'm Mark Reed, and you've been watching Mark Reed Atheism. Thank you.